Good morning, afternoon, or good evening, folks. I'm your host and guide, Chris Roberts. I'm going to take you on a tour of the underground to help you prepare for what's really out there. Whether you're on the front lines battling the latest threats or leading the overall defensive strategy within your organization, my focus is to help you uncover the best ways, means, and methods to effectively and efficiently use actual threat intelligence within your company, providing you with more insights and practical ways to identify threats and reduce risks before they become incidents. Ready to dive in? Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of the Dr. Dark Web. And as always, you have Danny and myself. And we are honored to be joined by Naomi, who is one of Cybersixgill's wizards when it comes to digging out information, intelligence, from numerous different countries, of which we will have a lengthy conversation. Naomi, absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Hi, Chris. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, totally. This is I'm looking forward to this. This is kind of a geeking out session because for me it's one of those things. I mean, I'm very fortunate over the years, spoke a couple of different languages in a couple of different countries for a couple of different reasons, but never had to focus on gathering information and turning into usable intelligence in other languages, which is, from what I understand, your specialty.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. My name is Naomi Yusupov. I'm the Chinese Intelligence Analyst at Cybersixgill. So, I speak Mandarin, and this is why I'm here. A little bit of my background on Mandarin. I majored economics and East Asian studies, and then I focused on China and Chinese studies, and of course the language. And then I spent some time in Beijing studying again the language and living experience in China. End up in the cybersecurity world. And now mainly what I do is searching the dark web for Chinese sources and other sources as well.
Now, when you say other sources as well, I'm interested on that one. Is it primarily going from Chinese focus and then outwards, or is it to some degree roads leading into Chinese sources, or a little bit of both?
It is like when you're digging in the dark web, you're not very picky, you're scrolling, You're coming up with this gold, or you're coming up with this weird sites. So usually, we do China, and also we speak Russian, so we do search for also Russian sites on dark web. But we're not picky, we're searching, we're digging, and what we found and what we find, it's okay.
So let's, the obvious question there is, world affairs at the moment are, to say they're a bit of a mess is probably an understatement. And there's a lot of conversations going on about collaboration between those two countries, of which you are, probably digging around in all sorts of interesting stuff. I'm interested, from your perspective, how much collaboration or cooperation do you see between those two powers?
This is a very popular question, I think we do see collaboration on some level, but because China is such an isolated country in terms of internet, and of course the language barrier, there isn't that amount of collaboration as we think of. Of course, in a national level with APTs and stuff, we maybe see a little bit more collaboration, but in terms of like forums and markets and, the regular criminal activity underground, we do see a little bit of collaboration, but not as much because of the language barriers, because of the difficulty of accessing those undergrounds that are not Chinese. And we'll talk a little bit today about how Chinese people operate in the underground.
Yeah, let's dig into that, because I mean, there's obviously a fairly well-known, at least on the surface level, there's a fairly good understanding as to where the restrictions are, what the restrictions are, to some degree, how communication is controlled and managed to some degree over there. There's obviously the Great Firewall that a lot of people in Google, the darn thing, where it is and all that kind of good stuff. I'm really intrigued because a lot of the darker side of stuff is obviously designed to obfuscate that. But in order to obfuscate it, you almost have to expose yourself that you're going there in the first place. How do people deal with that? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so of course we have the Great Firewall in China, which is the government way to block access and internet to the outside world. So Chinese threat actors, when dealing with that, need to overcome that difficulty, right? And matter of fact, they have the Great Firewall and censorships, but they also have the VPN barrier. So in 2017, the Chinese government had like a big crackdown over VPN. So that means that they require the big Chinese telecommunication networks, three of them, China Mobile, China Telecom, and China Unicom, to just block individual access to VPN. So even if you want to, climb the wall and jump the wall, the Great Firewall, you have a really big difficulty to do that. Myself, when I was in China and I downloaded like VPN in Israel and then went to China, when I was connecting to internet networks in Chinese, my university, it didn't work. So they found a really creative ways to overcome those kind of barriers. So in terms of connecting to the Onion browser, Chinese people they can do it. They do it with a thing called Tor bridges. So there are unpublished Tor nodes for this kind of situation when you have a nation that blocks Tor or something like that. So there are unpublished Tor nodes and they change every other time. And then Chinese people connect to Tor Onion through those nodes. But we see the statistic is not really high. Tor has statistics estimation of connection in their site. And the statistics talks about like 2.5% of daily users connecting from mainland China. So it's, in terms of comparing to the huge amount of internet users there are in China, it's really, really low percentage.
It's a low percentage. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting because I mean, it's one of those, we, in a lot of other countries, we take that freedom to go almost anywhere we can. It's just, we don't think about it. Whereas over there, if you want to actually be on other sides of the net or on VPN or look for news or sources elsewhere, you first got to break out of your own infrastructure, it's one of those things that I think so many countries and so many people in countries just don't think about. Especially if you're going to perpetrate any kind of crime against somebody. I mean, you've got to double down on what you're going to do to be able to get out to do the work. So I'm interested. I mean, you were obviously over there. You're doing a lot of the studies in both of those organizations and areas. What is, if you're within China mainland, or you're within any of the areas of control and management, should we say, what is the attraction of the darker side of the internet? Why is it important still for being over there? And why do we still see people over there flocking to it?
Yeah. So if we'll separate the two criminal, like Chinese underground activity, we'll see two areas, right? So on the dark web, on Onion sites, we'll see more domestic criminal activity. So Chinese hackers hacking to Chinese databases, or selling drugs in mainland China, or those kind of like domestic criminal activity that they're afraid doing elsewhere, because of the great punishments. But on the Chinese clear web and deep web and those instant messages apps, they have the unique ones, so WeChat, QQ, we see more targeting foreigners activity. So we have fraud, selling credit cards, illegal goods, that kind of stuff. But there we'll see it in Slang, of course, because they want to avoid those kind of censorships. So we do see a lot of Slang on clear and deep web sources, Chinese Slang. And I think why dark web is still important is that you do see this small amount of Chinese threat actors going to the dark web, because there they can interact with different kind of undergrounds, like Russian ones, or learn from those Onion different undergrounds and communicate with them. We do see it in a low percentage, as I said earlier, but some of them do learn from them and trying to stay up to date on different kind of hacking tools, different kind of malware, that sort of stuff. And of course, it's a place of free speech. You can see free speech on clear web and deep web in the Chinese network. So this is why I think Chinese hackers do use the dark web.
Got it. So interesting conversation on the Slang side of things. It's always one of those areas, having worked on the information intelligence side, years and years ago, you might have found somebody complaining about breaking into the company or the organization or doing something and using the wording. But nowadays, slang, things within context, keywords and cursives, that seems to be more and more and more so. And when you start looking at Chinese, Russian, and various other languages, you have to know what you're doing. I mean, how much of it is just because you've immersed yourself and you know so much of that knowledge? Do you just understand it? And how much of it is could somebody pick up? And then the other part of it is how much of it could be done from a machine standpoint? I'm interested in those thoughts.
Yeah. So first of all, important key on Slang is that Slang is constantly changing because
Right.
you have like this kind of cycle of censorship, and they come up with a slang word for some criminal activity, and then the censorship figure it out, and then they have a new word. So you have really changing amount of slang, and you need to keep up with that. So of course, as analysts do it, and we try to, we'll keep up with the slang, and if we have some weird word, and we see it a lot of times comes up, so we'll dig into that. And of course, we have machine learning kind of models who do that for us. But as we can do it, the Chinese government can do it, and to keep up with that phase. So again, it's like a little bit of a cycle and a battle. So I do think we're going into phase where data science and those language models will be useful, but I think that humans would they wouldn't keep up with the changing slang
Well,
that
that makes sense.
easily.
Almost you're building a contextual dictionary to say, look, if you see this and you see this, or you see this threat actor using these terms, this is what they might mean now. This is what they might mean
Yeah,
eventually. Yeah, it's again, it's interesting because it's cat and mouse, and it's not
yeah.
just adversary versus researcher. It's adversary versus country and researchers in there at the same time. I mean, it's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, and the amount of people who they get into that, Baidu, the Chinese Google, they have people actually hired people to go over the Chinese internet and dig into those kind of censored words. So they
Right.
have army of analysts doing that job.
Oh
So
yeah. So give me the logic. I mean, obviously, let's take a different tact on this one. We know from a lot of the conversations within the military side and the government side, a lot of the intellectual property, the US, Europe, and other countries haven't managed to hold on to their intellectual property, haven't managed it, secured it, safeguarded it effectively, and it's obviously been used over in other countries, China being one fairly obvious example. When you start taking a look at the data that's moving and the data that's shifting, what are you typically seeing adversaries going after? You they going after credit cards, people, or are they going after intellectual property, or is it just like everywhere else? It's they're going after whatever they can find.
I think they're after everyone, honestly. So we do see, for example, different kind of slang, and of course, as you said, like credit cards, we have different kind of. As for domestic criminality on credit cards, for those who didn't went to China, in China they don't use credit cards, right? They have like WeChat Pay and Alipay. It's kind of you pay with your phone, and you scan a barcode wherever, like in your taxi, in your hotel room, in your supermarket. So they don't have this kind of credit card. So instead of selling credit cards, they sell Alipay accounts or these WeChat accounts with amount of money. So we do see the domestic activity of credit cards is quite different. But if you look at the criminal activity on credit cards for foreign countries like Japan, it will be like our normal,
The
CVV
normal
and
flow.
our
Yeah.
the normal flow.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we see, on the English speaking and, well, actually English, I was to say Latin, but that's showing my age. On the English and Spanish and South American channels, we see a ton of PayPal accounts being sold. I mean, they're forever being traded, 10, 20, 30% on whatever the balance is in the account. So it's that same kind of philosophy, but a very different targeted payment system over in China.
Yeah, for sure.
Got it. That makes sense. So, question for you. Back to we talked about data science a little bit and machine learning. How much, obviously you've been working on this for years. So machine learning has been creeping in and coming into this. How much has that helped? What areas, if any, has it helped you evolve the information to intelligence? I'm kind of interested on that.
I think the most really effective way is the hacking area, in my opinion, like from my experience, because the hacking is quite, as I said, like most of it is on clear web, and we see it on like different kind of forums, deep web. So hacking has a lot of different terminologies that are, there to stay, and they're different kind of
Yeah.
words that are updating, but like it's more technical terminology. So you have easy way, like you're tracking this, it's more easy to track this kind of technological terminology because like you
Got it.
can't really translate it to that slang. Like, so in hacking, we see a lot of slang words, of course, but they're more technological oriented. So it's for us easy to see how they change and to follow them with machine learning models.
That makes sense. So you're almost using technology to track the technology. Because I mean, there's
Yeah.
so much of it out there. So yeah, and that makes sense. Because I mean, if you think about it, years ago, when we started with technology, we didn't have many words for it. We didn't actually have much of it. And what we had, we could context or put into context fairly easy. And nowadays, it's crazy. The types of devices, the systems, the network, the connectivity, and just the expansion of tech. That would actually make sense because now you've almost got a dictionary of things that you can use and fuzzy and stemming types of searches you can use with it. So at least you can put stuff into some kind of a context.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So here's another question for you. And this one fascinates me because I've done various different languages, but most of the languages I've done start on this side and go this direction. Apart from obviously Hebrew, which does completely different things altogether, and Russian, which does some modern phrase things, and they throw Chinese in there as well. You must be working that way much more than you're working that way, which is that's fascinating for me. How are you, because you've got to rationalize those data structures and the sentence structures and everything. How the heck do you do that?
Yeah. So in order to keep up with the slang, I really doing a lot of research on Chinese sources, and then just read, just read the information. I hear a lot of podcasts, and I like, I'm trying to stay up to date with daily language that you are
Right.
not necessarily studying at school or in university. So you really try up to keep up with the language, and then you kind of need to understand from the context. Does that make sense? You just
Yep.
you read something, and then you kind of like, okay, are they hinting A? And then you see it in another place that you're kind of understanding that this is what they meant.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, you have to immerse yourself. I mean, it's not just something you'd be like, okay, I'll do it next week or I'll look at it.
Yeah. You need to really to keep up with the slang, changing slang.
That makes sense. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, you've come up through this. Actually, here's a question: how long were you over in China for? If you were over, you said you were over in Beijing. If was that right?
Yeah, I was like, I went to China for 2 times. So the
Yep.
first time I studied in Beijing, in university called Renmin University. And then the second time I went to China, I studied in a more conservative province, and which called Shandong. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Like I'm a vegetarian, and they didn't have anything without meat. This is how conservative are they. So then
Right.
I studied in this Shandong University in Jinan, which is also near
Yeah.
Beijing, but not quite. And I think like if you sum it up, I was like half a year in China, something like
Nice.
that. Yeah. And I think that this was a great experience to understand, the ecosystem, to understand how they live. And I wouldn't understand it if I wouldn't like went there. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I've been fortunate to travel to a number of different countries. China has not been one of them yet, and probably won't be
yeah,
for a while.
yeah,
But
until
um,
2024
yeah, at least
or
I got a
now.
few years I got to wait for. Unfortunately, a few more on that one, but at some point, hopefully. But I know that feeling because Japan has always been one of those
Yeah.
ones that but I finally got over there couple of years ago, 2, 3 years ago. I finally got over there. Absolutely amazing. You know what you think versus when you're there, totally different.
Yeah, totally
Um,
different.
yeah, absolutely amazing on that one. And again, to your point, you understand. You can start to put more context. You can start to figure out why something and how something is said and the logic for it being phrased and structured in a certain ways. But just by literally, I remember sitting on the street corner one time for like several hours, just watching and listening to people as they were coming in and out of the train station. It was amazing, fascinating.
Yeah. I think that people who are interested in dark web really need to understand the ecosystem first. You need to understand the different kind of circumstances and environment in which Chinese threat actors operate in. And then when you already understand this kind of ecosystem, you know where to focus your resources on. And, because Chinese threat actors, they do act on clear web, but they act also on dark web. So when
Right.
you understand this kind of different ecosystem, you understand where to look for what you want.
Now, you made mention as well, because obviously when we talk about the Dr. Dark Web stuff and everything else, we're not honestly just focusing on Tor Onion and everything else. You made mention of one of the other focus areas, which is the IRC channels, the message groups, the telegraphs, and the various country-specific ones. How much work do you do on those? And I mean, how do you keep track of all of those conversations? I'm interested, whatever you can say, let's put it that way.
Okay, so first of all, in Cybersecurity, our solutions are automated. So we have a lot of automation, and the way we collect things is automated. But then when you go over it, you have different kind of data science mechanism that filters the information for you. And then you'll get this kind of core information or alerts on core information, or if you have like mention of certain word that I'm digging for this week or I found interesting, then I'll get an alert and then I'll dig into that intelligence. But yeah, in China, as you mentioned, we have different kind of platforms. We
Right.
have WeChat, which is a huge platform in China. Everyone, like, you can't go to China without WeChat. It's instant messages. Like, first it was instant message platform controlled by Tencent, which is a huge
Oh,
Chinese
yeah,
tech
yeah, yeah.
giant. Yeah. So, and nowadays WeChat, like, you can book flights through WeChat. You can go to your doctor's appointment through WeChat. Like, you can do anything with WeChat,
Oh,
honestly. Yeah. So we have a lot of mini programs on WeChat, and then the whole ecosystem where Chinese threat actors can operate in. So we do have WeChat, and also we have QQ, which is like also from Tencent, but it's like the kind of old 90s instant message. Quite like
coming
ICQ for
AOL
us.
Instant Messenger and
Yeah,
Jabber.
like,
Or,
so QQ, it's a little more like old one, but still popular among threat actors. So they have like exclusive groups there, and you need to answer a little bit different kind of questions before you get in. So it's very exclusive.
that brings up an interesting point, and you kind of hit on this. It's something we've hinted a couple of times on other episodes of the Dr. Dark Web series, which is you can't just dive in and expect to find everything. There's your profiles you build have to be accepted into groups. You've got to have some kind of history. You've got to have done certain things, exchange, and gotten to know people. So you yourself haven't just got to invest knowing what's going on. You've actually got to invest several versions of yourself into this as well. And it sounds like the Chinese ecosystem is very, very similar as far as that goes.
Yeah. You need to definitely, when interacting with threat actors, Chinese threat actors, you need to talk at their level. You need to, use their phrases, because if you're gonna introduce yourself, Google Translate version, they gotta know, like, So you really need to disguise yourself and try to think like a Chinese person and try to talk like a Chinese person on the streets. Like, you need to engage with this unofficial language and terminology.
Just kind of wandering there. I say, hello, I'm slightly lost at the moment. Can we just have a little conversation, please? There's a good chap. Yeah, no, that's just not going to work, is it, anymore these days? We're
Yeah.
just done at this point. It's done. Oh, that's awesome. So I got some questions for you. We've kind of talked about, the journey. We've talked about where it's come from, where and how information is, how you take the information, move to intelligence, how you've used technology to help and assist with some of those areas. Throw the crystal ball out a little bit for me. Kind of throw it out a couple of years out. where do you see, as you look at China, you look at Russia, and you look at everything that's going on and everything that continues to go on, how or where would you see technology in the future, like the next couple of years? Where would you want, if it's your crystal ball and you're like, hey, this is what I want to help me do things better or differently as I see things evolve in the future?
To help me as a researcher or
Yeah,
to
as a researcher, and then wherever else you want to go, if you want to dig in, any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So I think the crystal ball, of course, like definitely we'll see China emerging in the next 10 years. Like this is certainly my thought.
Hmm.
They will be a lot of more capable. They will stop, in my opinion, steal intellectual property, and they will try to figure things on their own. And they will be a technological advanced country, and that also implicates the dark web. So we'll see a lot of more advanced and mature Chinese threat actors. This is why I think it's really important to try to understand the ecosystem right now and to try to keep things up, because they're just growing and getting more advanced, in my opinion. So this is one side of the ball. And in terms of us as cyber researchers and analysts, I think that we need to focus our research also on Asia and also on the different kind of ecosystem there, like China versus Japan, China versus India, and those kind of
Yeah.
areas, because these things will come up in the next 10 years, in my opinion. And we need to dig into those and not staying on Russia, versus US kind of underground.
No, you're right. It's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of us who were, watching current affairs and going, "This is terrible. What can we do? How do we focus over here?" But also keeping one very, very careful eye on the Asia Pacific dynamics, because if we
Yeah.
take both eyes off, then yeah, things get a little interesting. And unfortunately, I think you're right. There are a lot of people still fairly, I'm going to say not so many. There are people US focused and European focused who don't necessarily think in that same way. To your point, and you said it very, very succinctly, which is it's still the old school. It's still like it's us versus, the old Soviet Union. And
Yeah, it's
yeah.
changing really fast. And as I see it, Asian countries will have really advanced
Mhm.
technological capabilities in the next years, and they will come into the stage.
I wonder if that's something. I mean, we talk about key takeaways as we do the Dr. Dark Web thing. To me, that from listening to you, from my standpoint, one of those key takeaways is pay more attention. Don't just think about stuff that's here or Russia or Europe or something. It is pay much more attention to the area of the world. I'm interested from your standpoint, if you were talking to the audience as we are, what couple of things would you want to impart to them, give them some like key thoughts and some key takeaways on this?
Yeah. So I think the number one takeaway is that understanding that Chinese threat actors, unlike different underground communities, they don't operate exclusively like on dark web. So as I mentioned, you need to really understand how they work, and in order to understand how they work, you need to really understand the government, the policies, the culture, the different kind of ecosystem where they operate. Because China is such an isolated country, they find different kind of solutions for that. And also another takeaway, as you said, is keeping up with this kind of area in Asia. East Asia, in my opinion, is fascinating and very important. So keeping up with those kind of dynamics between countries, between cultures, between different kind of government, that really like have an impact on the dark web operation. And we do see Chinese advertising hacktivism as a national weapon. So
Yes.
probably, Chinese hackers, they do have some different kind of national encouragement to do such
Yeah.
things. So in order to keep up with that, you need to keep up with the policy that the government instructs.
So I have a question, and I do not want to put you on the spot. So you're allowed to go with the question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yeah.
And this is almost a personal thing, but I think a lot of the folks listening into on this one would probably be interested as well. You have a crazy amount of knowledge of this whole area. would you be willing to come back on some point in time in the future? We'll figure it out, and literally give almost a briefing. I mean, I'll introduce you and go, and over to Naomi, and almost give a briefing on a lot of the stuff you talked about, like a little bit more of an in-depth briefing on some of the stuff you talked about, the Chinese, the geopolitical situation, the things to think about.
Yeah, of course. I love this
Fantastic.
kind of stuff. I'm really let me talk about China all day. um, this is
Yeah.
I love doing what I do, and I'm blessed. But yeah, for sure, China has a lot of implications. And me as a person, as an analyst, I'm not only keeping up with the underground and what's happening out there, I'm also keeping up with the geopolitical situation, because it has huge amount of effect on the underground.
Yeah, I would love to, at some point in time in the future, I would love to sit down and go through that. And I think that's one of those things on the audience would actually get I think it's one of those things that's kind of necessary, because we don't tend to hear it. We don't hear it from people who are literally in it up to their elbows on a daily basis. You always get the think tanks. You get the, think tanks out of DC, like, well, we need to think about, no, I want somebody who's like up to their elbows in it on a daily basis going, hey, this is what we see. This is why we see it. And this is why it needs to be, to be considered. So I would, and for the stuff that I do outside of the Dr. Dark Web stuff, I would put it to some pretty good use as well. Danny, any thoughts? What have I missed? What have we gone through? This has been fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's always great to have more of the Cybersixgill folks on. So Naomi, thank you so much for giving us some, insights into some of the work you're doing, which is awesome. Would love to have you back. I think the talking points were super intriguing, and we should definitely have you back on.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
I like that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Naomi, absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much for everything. And I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Yeah. In Barcelona, right?
Potentially. Yeah. We've got to have that conversation. Yeah, potentially. We'll see where that all goes. Yeah. It's trying to juggle everything at the moment we'll just leave it as the word interesting, shall we say?
Oh.
Hopefully, but to be determined.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
No, thank you very much. Danny, as always, thank you a huge amount for sorting this out, sending this up. And I owe an apology, because we should have done this last night, but I was still sitting on an airplane, and then we got from the airplane to the hotel and I fell asleep in the lobby. So my bad, I apologize. And so we rescheduled. Thankfully, I appreciate it for this evening. So with that, everybody have a wonderful evening and afternoon and morning, and we will see you all in the dark. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Dr. Dark Web. This show is brought to you by Cybersixgill, the threat intelligence company. If you would like to learn more, please feel free to follow or subscribe to Dr. Dark Web on your favorite podcast streamer. Or, as an alternative, you can always find us online at cybersixgill.com/podcast. You'll find all the latest episodes, goodies, nuggets of information, background, and probably some stickers or two. See you in the dark.